The woman in 8A hadn't moved for 3 hours, not once. While other passengers shifted restlessly through the turbulence over the Pacific, she remained perfectly still, her breathing so controlled it barely disturbed the navy blue scarf draped across her shoulders. The flight attendant had noticed her immediately during boarding, not because of the understated pec fipe on her wrist or the way she declined champagne with a slight shake of her head, but because of how she'd paused at the aircraft door, running her fingers along the aluminum frame like someone greeting an old friend. Now at 41,000 foot somewhere between Tokyo and San Francisco, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom with an edge that made even the most oblivious passengers look up from their screens. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ryan Gallagher. We have a situation developing. If there are any military pilots aboard, particularly anyone with combat experience, please identify yourself to the crew immediately." The woman's eyes opened. Not suddenly, not with alarm, but with the measured awareness of someone who'd learned to transition from deep sleep to full alertness without broadcasting the change. Her name was Adriana Cortez, though no one on this flight would know that name meant anything. Forbes had featured her twice, once as the aerospace executive who'd revolutionized drone navigation systems, and again when her company's valuation crossed $10 billion. They never mentioned the 7 years she'd spent in an F-16 cockpit over Afghanistan, or why her call sign had nothing to do with leaving others in her dust. It came from the dust storm over Kandahar, where she'd landed a Viper with no hydraulics and half a wing, saving not just her own life, but providing cover for a medical evacuation that saved 13 others. The flight attendant approached her row with studied calm, but Adriana had already unbuckled her seat belt. She stood slowly, deliberately, her movements betraying nothing of the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. It had been 4 years since she touched a stick. 4 years of board meetings and acquisitions and careful image management. 4 years of pretending the sky was something she observed through office windows rather than something she'd once carved through at Mach 2. "Ma'am," the attendant whispered, though her eyes darted toward the cockpit door. "The captain needs to know, do you have flight experience?" Adriana reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. Inside, behind her driver's license and black American Express card, was something she'd never removed despite her lawyer's advice. Her military ID expired, but still bearing the wings that had once defined everything she was. "Tell Gallagher he has a Viper driver in 8A, she said quietly. 7,000 hours combat qualified." The attendant's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching relief, but Adriana was already moving toward the cockpit, her Hermes flats silent on the cabin floor. The cockpit door opened before she reached it, and Captain Ryan Gallagher's face appeared, weathered mid-50s, the kind of pilot who'd earned his stripes in the old days when flying was still as much art as science. His eyes swept over her designer clothes, the subtle diamonds in her ears, and for a moment she saw the doubt. It was a look she'd seen 1,000 times before in briefing rooms and on flight lines from men who couldn't reconcile her appearance with her capabilities. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but," he began, and she heard it in his voice, the polite dismissal already forming. "Captain," she interrupted, her tone shifting to something harder, more precise. "You've got a situation serious enough to ask for help over the intercom. I'm assuming that means your first officer is incapacitated, you're dealing with a system failure, or both. You have exactly 10 seconds to decide if you want to waste time questioning my qualifications or if you want someone who's landed damaged aircraft in zero visibility conditions to help you get these people home." Ryan Gallagher studied her for a heartbeat, then stepped aside. The cockpit was bathed in amber warning lights, and she immediately understood why he'd made the call. First Officer Mark Hensley was slumped in his seat, conscious but pale, gripping his chest. Classic cardiac event. But worse than that, half the instrument panel was dark. Electrical failure probably cascading. The Boeing 777 was flying on emergency power. And from the look of the weather radar, they were heading into a storm system that would test even a fully functional aircraft. "When did you lose primary electrical?" she asked, already scanning the instruments with practiced efficiency. Gallagher's doubt evaporated as he watched her eyes move across the panels, reading the story they told. 14 minutes ago. Started with a bus tie failure, then cascaded. We're on emergency power, but it's degrading. I need someone to handle navigation and systems while I fly. Adriana Cortez was already sliding into the first officer's seat as two flight attendants helped Hensley out. Her fingers found the controls with muscle memory that 4 years couldn't erase. You have a Viper driver as your FO now, Captain. My call sign was Dust. She began working through the emergency checklist. Her movements economical, precise. That said, this Boeing flies like a pregnant whale compared to what I'm used to, so you'll need to talk me through the specifics. Gallagher actually smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. You military pilots all say that about commercial aircraft. Then you realize we're flying 300 souls, not just your own ass. Copy that, she replied, the military acknowledgement coming automatically. Through the windscreen, clouds were building, dark towers of cumulonimbus that would hammer them with turbulence. Lightning flickered in the distance. What's our nearest suitable alternate? That's the problem, Gallagher said. We're 2 hours from anywhere with a runway long enough for a 777, and this storm system extends for 300 miles. Adriana nodded, already calculating fuel reserves, wind patterns, and descent profiles. The radio crackled with air traffic control, their voice tense with barely controlled concern. United 847, be advised weather conditions deteriorating rapidly at all primary alternates. Recommend immediate descent to lower altitude to conserve fuel while we coordinate emergency landing options. Adriana keyed the mic before Gallagher could respond. Oakland Center, United 847. We copy weather advisories. Request vectors to any suitable field within 150 miles. We're dealing with cascading electrical failure and need priority handling. The professionalism in her voice, the clipped military precision, changed something in the air traffic controller's tone. United 847. Roger. Stand by for vectors. Can you declare your fuel state? She glanced at the gauges, cross-referencing with the backup mechanical indicators. The electrical failure was affecting their fuel management systems, making accurate readings difficult. Oakland Center, we're estimating 40,000 pounds remaining, but we've lost primary fuel quantity indicators, running on mechanical backups. Ryan Gallagher shot her a look of approval. She just told ATC enough to ensure priority handling without causing panic. In the passenger cabin behind them, 298 people continued watching movies, sleeping, or working on laptops, unaware that their lives now depended on a partnership between a career commercial pilot and a billionaire who'd left the cockpit 4 years ago to build an empire. You know, Gallagher said as he fought to maintain altitude in the increasing turbulence, I flew with a lot of military pilots in my time, Navy mostly. They always wanted to tell war stories. Adriana Cortez was busy cross-checking their position against the weather radar, looking for gaps in the storm system. I'm not Navy, she said simply. And the stories that matter don't get told at cruise altitude. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cockpit in stark white. For a moment, Gallagher saw her differently. Not the polished executive who'd boarded in first class, but someone who'd lived in that lightning. Danced with it at speeds that would tear this airliner apart. What's your plan, Dust? He used her call sign deliberately, acknowledging what she was beneath the designer clothes. She pulled up the emergency navigation display, her fingers flying across the degraded interface. We punched through the weakest part of the system here. She indicated a section of the storm that showed marginally less intensity. Drop to 25,000 to conserve fuel. Declare emergency with San Francisco approach. The crosswinds will be hell, but SFO has the longest runway and the best emergency equipment. We can make it, but it won't be pretty. Gallagher nodded. You understand this isn't an F-16. We can't just point and shoot through weather. We've got families back there. I've got family back there, too, she said quietly. And Gallagher noticed for the first time the thin gold band on her right hand, worn on the traditional Polish finger. My daughter's in 23C. She's 12. She doesn't know I used to fly. The admission hung between them for a moment before Adriana returned to the instruments. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is energy management. We need to trade altitude for airspeed efficiently. The turbulence hit them like a sledgehammer. The 777 lurched violently, and somewhere in the cabin, passengers screamed. Adriana's hands moved instinctively to the controls, supporting Gallagher as he fought to maintain aircraft control. The storm was worse than the radar indicated, a massive supercell that had developed rapidly in the unstable air mass over the Pacific. "We're not going to make SFO," Gallagher said through gritted teeth. "This thing is pushing us too far north." Adriana was already recalculating, her mind running through options at combat speed. In an F-16, she could have punched through or gone around, but the Boeing was a different beast entirely. Massive, heavy, and burning fuel at an alarming rate with damaged systems. "Travis Air Force Base," she said suddenly. "It's closer and they have a 12,000-foot runway. Military field, but they'll take a civilian emergency." Ryan Gallagher looked skeptical. "They don't usually." "They will for me," she said, already switching radio frequencies. "Travis Tower. Travis Tower. This is November 47 Alpha requesting emergency landing clearance for United 847 Boeing 777 with electrical failure and weather emergency." The response was immediate and negative. "November 47 Alpha. Travis is a military installation. Redirect to civilian airfield." Adriana Cortez took a breath, then keyed the mic again. "Travis Tower. This is Lieutenant Colonel Adriana Cortez, former 555th Fighter Squadron. Authentication code Viper 77 Delta. I'm currently first officer on United 847 with 298 souls on board. We have cascading electrical failure and insufficient fuel to reach SFO through this weather system. Request immediate emergency landing clearance." The silence stretched for several seconds. Gallagher watched her, saw something change in her posture, straighter, harder. The civilian executive disappearing entirely. "Stand by, United 847, came the response. And then after another pause. "Colonel Cortez, Travis Tower. You're cleared for emergency. Approach runway 21 left. Emergency vehicles standing by. Welcome back to the pattern, dust." The relief in the cockpit was palpable, but Adriana was already focused on the next problem. The approach into Travis would require them to descend through the worst of the storm, and with degraded instruments, they'd be flying partially blind. "Captain, I need you to trust me on something," she said, pulling up the approach plates on the backup display. "I've flown this approach 100 times, but never in something this big. You're going to have to be my hands while I'm your eyes." Gallagher nodded. They were entering a partnership now, beyond rank or experience. Two pilots bound by the singular goal of bringing everyone home. The aircraft shuddered again as they entered the outer bands of the storm. Rain hammered the windscreen with such intensity that forward visibility dropped to near zero. The emergency electrical system flickered, warning lights cascading across the panel like falling dominoes. In the cabin, the flight attendants were strapping in, their professional masks hiding the fear that everyone on the crew must be feeling, but none of them knew about the woman in the cockpit. "United 847, turn left, heading 240. Descend and maintain 15,000. Travis approach control guided them toward the field. The controller's voice was different now. Adriana recognized the tone. This wasn't standard civilian ATC anymore. Travis had scrambled their military controllers, the ones who guided damaged fighters home. They knew who she was, or at least who she had been. The turbulence was relentless. The 777 pitched and rolled like a ship in a hurricane, its massive frame groaning under the stress. Gallagher's knuckles were white on the yoke, his jaw clenched as he fought to maintain control. Adriana split her attention between the failing instruments and the view outside, using lightning flashes to gauge their position relative to the terrain she knew was below. "You're doing great, Captain," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Just hold what you've got." "We're punching through in about 30 seconds. It was the voice she'd used with wingmen in combat, steady and assured, even when missiles were in the air. Gallagher responded to it, his breathing evening out slightly. They broke through the worst of it at 12,000 feet, but what they saw made Adriana's blood run cold. The electrical failure had been worse than they realized. The landing gear indicators were all dark. There was no way to know if the gear would deploy, and manual extension in a 777 was a complex procedure that required systems they might not have. "Gallagher," she said quietly, "we might have to put this bird down on its belly." The captain's face paled, but his hands remained steady on the controls. A gear-up landing in a 777 had been done before, but rarely, and never in conditions like these. The crosswind at Travis was gusting to 40 knots. Rain was still hammering them, and they had one shot at this. "Travis Tower," Adriana radioed. "United 847 unable to confirm landing gear status. Requesting phone the runway and have emergency crews standing by for possible gear-up landing." The response was immediate. "Roger, United 847. Phone trucks are rolling. You're cleared for any runway you need. The field is yours." She turned to Gallagher. "Have you ever done a gear-up in the sim?" "Once," he admitted. 8 years ago." "You never in anything this big?" she said, then added with a ghost of a smile. "But I did put a Viper down in a dust storm with no gear and half a wing. The principle's the same, just more airplane to worry about." Ryan actually laughed, a short bark of tension release. "Just more airplane, right?" They began the approach and Adriana started calling out the descent profile from memory, overlaying her knowledge of Travis's approach with the Boeing's performance characteristics. The rain had lessened slightly, but the crosswind was brutal, pushing them off center line repeatedly. Ryan fought it with everything he had, while Adriana managed what was left of their systems, coaxing every bit of performance from the dying electrical system. 5 miles out, she announced, watching their position on the one functioning GPS display. "Gear handle down." Ryan reached for the gear lever, pulled it. Nothing. No sounds of hydraulic movement, no indicator lights, nothing. They exchanged a glance. This was really happening. They were about to attempt to land a 777 with 298 passengers on its belly in a storm. "United 847 Travis Tower. We show you on final runway is phoned. Emergency cruise report ready. You're cleared to land at your discretion." Adriana keyed the intercom to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the flight deck. We're on final approach to Travis Air Force Base. We're experiencing a technical issue with our landing gear. As a precaution, we need everyone in brace position. Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing." She kept her voice calm, professional, giving away nothing of the complexity of what they were about to attempt. In 23C, her daughter Isabella would be hearing this, though she wouldn't know it was her mother's voice on the intercom. Adriana pushed the thought away. There would be time for that later if they survived this. 2 miles, she called out. Airspeed 145 knots, sync rate 700. Ryan was flying purely on instinct now, feeling the aircraft through the controls, anticipating the wind gusts before they hit. It was the kind of flying that couldn't be taught, only earned through thousands of hours in angry skies. 1 mile. You're doing beautifully, Captain. Just hold it right there. Through the rain, the runway lights appeared. Beautiful parallel lines of white stretching into the distance, covered in white foam that gleamed in the emergency vehicle's floodlights. Fire trucks and ambulances lined both sides of the runway, their lights creating a corridor of red and white. 500 feet, Adriana called. Airspeed 140, center line looks good. The ground rushed up at them. Ryan began his flare, raising the nose to reduce their descent rate. This was the critical moment. Too high and they'd slam down. Too low and they'd hit nose first. Adriana watched the radar altimeter calling out heights. 100, 50, 40, 30, hold it, hold it. 20. The belly of the 777 kissed the foam-coated runway with a grinding shriek of metal on concrete. Sparks flew past the windows like horizontal fireworks. The deceleration threw everyone forward against their restraints. Ryan and Adriana fought together to keep the aircraft straight as it slid down the runway, using what was left of the rudder to maintain directional control. The noise was incredible. Grinding, tearing metal, the roar of foam being displaced, and underneath it all, the twin engines still running, their thrust reversers useless without the weight on wheels switches that would never activate. "Kill the engines!" Adriana shouted, and Ryan's hands flew to the fuel cutoff switches. The engines spooled down, and gradually, impossibly, the massive aircraft began to slow. The 777 finally came to rest 3/4 down the runway, sitting on its belly in a sea of foam, smoke rising from the hot metal where it had scraped along the concrete. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the cockpit. Then the evacuation alarm began to sound and training took over. "Evacuate aircraft, all slides, all exits," Adriana commanded over the intercom while Ryan began shutting down what remained of the aircraft's systems. The flight attendants were already in motion, doors flying open, slides deploying. 300 people began flowing out of the aircraft in controlled chaos, sliding down into the foam where emergency crews waited to guide them to safety. Adriana stayed in her seat, running through the shutdown checklist with Ryan, making sure everything was safe before they left. Only when the last of the passengers had evacuated did she finally unbuckle her harness. Ryan looked at her, extended his hand. "Thank you, Colonel. I couldn't have done that without you." She shook his hand, then surprised him by saying, "Yes, you could have. You're one hell of a stick, Ryan. I just helped with the navigation." They climbed out of the cockpit together to find the cabin empty, except for the flight attendants doing their final sweep. Through the windows, she could see passengers gathered on the tarmac, some crying, some hugging, all very much alive. "Mom," the voice came from behind her. Isabella stood in the aisle, her face pale but composed. One of the flight attendants had let her back on to find her mother. "Isabella," Adriana said, crossing to her daughter in 3 quick strides, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I'm okay. Everyone's okay." "That was you on the intercom," Isabella said into her shoulder. "That was you flying. It wasn't a question." Adriana pulled back, looked into her daughter's eyes, her late husband's eyes, deep brown and endlessly perceptive. "Yes," she admitted. "That was me. Dad always said you were a pilot before. He said you were the best pilot he ever knew." Isabella's voice was quiet, wondering. "He said you gave it up for us, for the company, but that the sky never really let you go." Adriana's eyes burned with sudden tears. Marcus had been gone 2 years now, claimed by the cancer that had taken him in 6 brutal months. He'd been the one to convince her to leave the Air Force to build something larger, safer. But he'd also been the one to insist she keep her licenses current. Keep the military ID in her wallet. "Just in case the sky calls you back," he'd said. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the wounded aircraft. The foam was dissipating, revealing the massive gouge the 777 had carved into the runway. It would be closed for days, maybe weeks, but everyone was walking away. Ryan appeared beside them. "There's a bus coming to take everyone to the terminal. But Colonel, the base commander would like a word with you first, if that's okay." Brigadier General Thomas Whitaker stood at the foot of the aircraft, his flight suit crisp despite the rain that was still falling. Adriana recognized him immediately. They'd served together in Afghanistan, though he'd been a major then, running operations while she was flying combat air patrol. "Cortez," he said, offering his hand. "When I heard your authentication code come across, I didn't believe it. Thought someone was playing a joke." The Adriana Cortez I knew swore she'd never fly anything without afterburners again. "Things change, sir," she replied, accepting the handshake. She had dropped the military honorifics years ago, but they came back now as natural as breathing. "Indeed, they do." Whitaker looked at the damaged 777, its belly torn open, its engine silent. That was some piece of flying, both of you. He included Ryan in his gaze. We've got the entire approach on radar tape. It's going to be required viewing at every aviation safety course for the next decade. Ryan stepped forward. General, I need to be clear about something. Colonel Cortez saved every life on that aircraft. I couldn't have managed the system's failures and the navigation without her. Whatever commendations or recognition come from this, she deserves the lion's share. Respectfully, Captain, that's not accurate, Adriana interjected. Captain Gallagher flew that approach in conditions that would have challenged any pilot. I just helped with navigation and systems management. It was a team effort. Whitaker smiled. Still the same Cortez. Never could take credit for anything. He turned serious. The NTSB will want to talk to both of you, of course, but right now there are 300 people who get to go home to their families because you two were on that aircraft. He paused, looking directly at Adriana. The Air Force never forgot you, Colonel. That landing in Kandahar is still taught at the weapons school. And now this, we could always use good instructors. I'm retired, General, Adriana said gently. I have a company to run, a daughter to raise. But even as she said it, she felt something stir inside her chest, something that had been dormant for 4 years. Isabella slipped her hand into her mother's. Mom flies drones now, she told the general with 12-year-old authority. She owns the company that makes the navigation systems that guide them. Dad used to say she found a way to fly without leaving the ground. Whitaker's expression shifted to understanding. Cortez Aerospace. I should have made the connection. Your systems are in half our UAVs now. He stepped back, saluted. Well then, ma'am, thank you for your service, past and present. As he walked away, Ryan Gallagher turned to them. Can I ask you something? Your call sign's dust. You said it wasn't about leaving people in your dust. So, what was it about? Adriana Cortez looked at the damaged aircraft, then at the emergency crews working efficiently around them, the passengers being loaded onto buses, the controlled chaos of a successful emergency response. The rain was stopping and breaks in the clouds revealed stars beginning to appear. It was Afghanistan 2017, she began, her voice quiet enough that Ryan and Isabella had to lean in to hear. We were providing air support for a medical evacuation. Sandstorm came out of nowhere, the kind that turns day into night in seconds. The helicopter couldn't fly in it, couldn't see to land. 13 wounded soldiers were going to die if that medevac didn't happen. She paused, remembering the taste of sand in her oxygen mask, the way the world had disappeared into a brown void. I volunteered to fly low below the storm layer, basically at ground level, to guide them in. Used my aircraft like a shepherd dog, creating a clear air pocket in my wake. The sand and dust would swirl around my Viper, but create a brief corridor of visibility behind me. The helicopter followed me in, landed using my jet wash as their guide. We got all 13 out. Ryan whistled low. That's insane. Flying a fighter jet at ground level in a sandstorm. It was necessary, Adriana said simply. Just like tonight was necessary. You do what the situation requires with whatever tools you have. She looked at her daughter. That's what your father understood. Why he supported me leaving the Air Force but insisted I keep my skills sharp. He knew that sometimes the sky calls you back. A bus pulled up beside them and the driver opened the doors. Other passengers were already aboard and Adriana saw several of them looking at her through the windows. Word was spreading about who she was, what she'd done. Tomorrow the media would descend. The billionaire fighter pilot who saved a plane load of people. Her carefully maintained corporate image would be forever changed. Ryan said as they boarded the bus. I've been flying commercial for 25 years. Thought I'd seen everything. But tonight reminded me why we do this. It's not about the routine flights, the perfect landings. It's about being ready for moments like this. Adriana took a seat next to Isabella, who immediately curled against her side. Through the bus window, she could see the damaged 777 surrounded by emergency lights, a wounded bird that had carried them through hell and delivered them safely to Earth. Her phone was already buzzing with messages, her board of directors, her executive team, all wondering why news reports were saying she'd been involved in an emergency landing. Tomorrow, she'd have to face them all, explain how the careful separation between her past and present had collapsed in one evening. But tonight, with her daughter safe beside her and 298 souls alive because 2 pilots had worked together in crisis, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 years, complete. The bus pulled away from the aircraft, heading toward the base terminal where FBI, NTSB, and FAA officials were undoubtedly already gathering. The other passengers were talking quietly among themselves, processing what they just survived. Several were openly crying, the adrenaline finally giving way to emotional release. An elderly man across the aisle caught Adriana's eye. "That was you, wasn't it?" he asked. "You're the one who got us down safely." Before she could deflect or minimize, Isabella spoke up. "My mom's a hero," she said with the absolute certainty that only a 12-year-old could muster. "She always has been. She just doesn't like people to know." The old man smiled. "Well, the secret's out now, young lady. Your mother saved our lives." Others were listening now, turning in their seats. Adriana felt the weight of their attention, their gratitude, their need to understand what had happened. She'd spent 4 years in boardrooms where her military service was a footnote, a bit of background that added gravitas to her business credentials. But these people didn't care about her company's valuation or her revolutionary drone technology. They cared that she'd been in that cockpit when everything went wrong. "It wasn't just me," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Captain Ryan Gallagher flew that approach in impossible conditions. The flight attendants executed a perfect evacuation. The emergency crews at Travis were ready for us. Everyone did their job. That's how we all walked away from this." But even as she deflected, she saw they weren't really listening to her words. They were looking at her with the same expression she'd seen on the faces of soldiers. She provided air cover for civilians in Afghanistan who'd watched her Viper circle overhead during tense situations. It was the look people gave to those who stood between them and catastrophe. Her phone rang, her board chairman, Charles Davenport. She let it go to voicemail. There would be time for those conversations later. Right now, she was still processing the fact that she'd been back in a cockpit, that her hands had once again helped guide an aircraft through crisis. For years of suppressing that part of herself, and it had returned instantly, like it had never left. "Mom," Isabella whispered. "Are you okay?" Adriana realized she was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears rolling down her cheeks. "I'm okay, baby. It's been a long time since I felt like myself." The bus pulled up to the terminal where chaos awaited. News vans were already arriving, their satellite dishes deploying like mechanical flowers seeking signal. Through the terminal windows, she could see officials in suits and uniforms, all waiting to debrief, to understand, to assign blame and credit for what had transpired. But first, she had something else to do. She stood up in the bus, causing everyone to look at her. "Before we go in there," Adriana said, addressing the passengers, "I need you all to know something. The media is going to want to make this about me, about my background, about the drama of it all. But Captain Gallagher is the hero here. He kept that aircraft under control in conditions that should have been impossible. He trusted a stranger to help him. Put aside ego and protocol to save lives. Whatever story gets told, make sure his name is at the center of it." Ryan stood up from his seat near the front. "With all due respect, Colonel, that's bull." The profanity from the professional captain shocked everyone, including Adriana. "You walked into that cockpit and took control of a situation that was spiraling toward disaster. You got us military landing clearance, navigated us through that storm, and helped me put that bird down when neither of us knew if we'd walk away from it. So, no, I won't let you disappear into the background on this one." The 2 pilots stared at each other across the length of the bus. A silent battle of wills between two people trained never to seek glory for doing their job. Finally, Adriana Cortez smiled. "How about we call it even, Captain? We both did our jobs. We both went home." Ryan Gallagher nodded. "I can live with that." As they filed off the bus, Isabella Cortez took her mother's hand again. "You're going to be famous now," she said. "Everyone's going to know who you really are." Adriana squeezed her daughter's hand. "I've been famous before, Isabella. It doesn't mean much. What matters is that everyone on that plane gets to have breakfast with their families tomorrow." They entered the terminal to a wall of flash photography and shouted questions. Adriana saw the NTSB investigators waiting with their recorders and notebooks. The airline executives huddled in urgent conversation. The base personnel trying to maintain order. But she also saw something else. The other passengers from Flight 847. Some still in shock. Others on phones telling loved ones they were safe. Each of them was a life that continued. A story that didn't end tonight on a runway in California. Brigadier General Thomas Whitaker appeared at her elbow. "There's a quiet room in the back if you need a moment before the circus begins," he offered. "The NTSB can wait 10 minutes. Adriana shook her head. "No, let's get this done. The sooner we debrief, the sooner they can learn from what happened. That's how we prevent the next one." It was the response of a professional, someone who understood that every incident was a teaching moment for the entire aviation community. Whitaker smiled. Once a warrior, always a warrior, even in a business suit. As they walked toward the investigators, Isabella tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, does this mean you're going to fly again? Like, really fly?" Adriana stopped, knelt down to her daughter's eye level. "I never really stopped flying, Isabella," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I just flew different things. The drones, the company, even our life together, it's all been a different kind of flight. But tonight reminded me that sometimes the sky needs us to answer when it calls. Your dad knew that. He knew that taking the pilot out of the cockpit doesn't take the cockpit out of the pilot." Isabella nodded solemnly. "He told me once that you were born to fly. That some people are meant for the ground and some for the sky. And you were definitely sky people. We're all sky people, baby. Every human who ever looked up and wondered what it would be like to touch the clouds. I just got lucky enough to do it for real." She stood and they continued toward the waiting officials. The debriefing would take hours. There would be recordings to review, decisions to justify, second-by-second analysis of every action taken in those critical minutes. But Adriana faced it with the same calm she'd once carried into combat missions. This was part of the job, the unglamorous aftermath of crisis. 3 hours later, the initial debriefing was complete. The NTSB investigators had been thorough but respectful, recognizing that both pilots had faced a nearly impossible situation and emerged successful. The preliminary assessment was clear. Catastrophic electrical failure caused by a manufacturing defect compounded by severe weather. The successful landing was being classified as exceptional airmanship under extreme circumstances. Ryan Gallagher found her in the break room nursing a cup of terrible government coffee. "They're arranging hotels for everyone," he said. "United wants to fly us all out tomorrow on a replacement aircraft." He paused. "They also want to know if you'll consider being on the crew for that flight. Apparently, the passengers are requesting it." Adriana laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "I don't think my insurance would cover that. Besides, I'm not current on the 777. Tonight was an emergency exception." "You seem pretty current to me," Ryan said. "Best first officer I've ever had, and I've flown with plenty." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two pilots coming down from the adrenaline high of crisis. Finally, Ryan asked, "What now?" "Back to the boardroom?" "Back to the boardroom," she confirmed. "Back to quarterly earnings and development meetings and all the things that keep my company running." But she paused, considering. "Maybe I'll also renew my flight instructor certification." Maybe volunteer with Civil Air Patrol on weekends. Isabella's old enough to learn now if she wants to. Ryan smiled. The sky doesn't let go easily, does it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more gripping tales of courage and resilience. Share this video with friends who love aviation stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.